Welcome to Sabbath Collective. We're a community of people interested in celebrating the Sabbath and pursuing God through an ancient Hebraic worldview of Scripture. Hey, Aaron, great to see you. Hey, Sissy, good to see you. Happy Sunday. So tonight, this morning, resilience. What comes to mind when you hear the word resilience? Most people kind of misunderstand the nature of resilience. The Latin present participle, resiliere, means to rebound or to return back. But when you are struck with a crisis or a trauma, you almost never can return to who you were. So it's not about really coming back to what was. That's almost always impossible. Scripture teaches us that we always need expansion in crisis in order to become larger and stronger. So in other words, the smaller you gets incorporated into the larger you. You don't lose the former you. You incorporate that you into the newer and larger you. So it's not really about bouncing back. It's interesting, when I searched for images to use with this teaching, I got a lot of things like a man would be pushing a boulder up a hill. I saw one with a dude, this is true, literally pushing a wall up against a SARS-CoV-2 spiky virus with the title, Steps to Making a Resilient Business. As in, some way you could build a wall and hide behind it, right? It's kind of comical. Resilience is more about becoming than overcoming. And we've talked about this a lot in the past months, about this sort of warlike language that people are using. And it's becoming more and more common. But resilience is not about war. It's more about becoming than overcoming. When you face crisis, challenge, you often feel like you're in danger of breaking apart. But that's the kind of cracking open that lets the light in, like Leonard Cohen writes about. And those cracks are what enable us to kind of connect to others as well as to the divine. So I'm going to kind of make a mashup, a definition I took from a bunch of different places. Resilience is adaptation. And when I say adaptation, I mean change to become better suited. So resilience is about a change that better suits you in times of adversity, trauma, uncertainty, or significant ongoing stressors. Now, let me see if you feel like you're going through something that requires resiliency now. Let me see a thumbs up. And as I say certain things in tonight's talk, if you feel something feels like a hot button to you, because this is kind of has a lot of triggers to it, right? Throw that out there so that I can respond to it, or so that the group can respond to it. There's a person named Dr. Rick Hansen, who's an author and a therapist. He's really good, and he's the author of a book called Resilient. And he says resiliency is like a sailboat with its keel. So most of you know what a keel is on a sailboat, right? So the waves and winds affect you, but they don't sink you because of the keel, and the keel would be resiliency. There's a sort of equilibrium that the sailor actually plays a key part in. The keel itself enables this sort of dance of balance between the sailor, the winds, the boat, and the waves. So there's not a fighting involved. So when someone is a sailor, they're not necessarily fighting the wind and the waves. If they were, they would lose. Hello. So it's not as much fighting as it is a sort of cooperative flow. And maybe if you are familiar with martial arts, it's the same thing. Anyone who understands martial arts understands this sort of energy flow. Resiliency is a highly interactive process. Resilience research is actually a fascinating area of study, and we're going to look at some of the common themes researchers see in resiliency, and I'm going to do this over a couple teachings. So let's talk about the first thing that resilient research shows, and that is resilient people get that shit happens, and it's not personal. And this is huge, okay? It's not personal. Now, let's take a look at a verse, 1 Peter 4:12. Dear friends, don't regard as strange the fiery ordeal occurring among you to test you, as if something extraordinary were happening to you. So this is the same kind of concept. By the way, fiery ordeal means literally that you're on fire, person on fire here. So don't regard it as something extraordinary, as if it were only happening to you. Understanding this doesn't really make space for the why me. Hey Lisa, great to see you. Let me see Aaron's comment. Can you explain the difference between resilience and perseverance? Yes, Aaron. In fact, I'm going to talk a whole teaching about that. The difference. There is a difference there between resilience and perseverance. And so I'm going to do a whole thing on that perseverance concept. And you're going to, not tonight, today, this morning, where you are, but we are going to talk about that. So again, Peter is saying, don't regard this as strange, the fiery ordeal, as if it's just about you. And many people believe their adversity is unique to them. So when you talk to them about something they're going through, you hear them saying, this always happens to me. Well, this is what happened to me. Well, I should have known it would happen to me. It's only me. That it's unique to them. And we need to understand where that comes from. And I think we all know this, but we live in an age of entitlement. Surprise, surprise. Social media, advertising, guilty parents give us the message that we deserve a kind of privilege, that everything should run smoothly with no challenges. And we actually raise our kids like that today, unfortunately, with no challenges. We never let them feel an unmet want. And I think that's because the pendulum always swings, right? And there was an era where people were just letting their kids scream their heads off to try to toughen them up or teach them how to self-soothe and all this stuff. And then the pendulum swung way over the other way. And so now we never want our child to feel an unmet want or a discomfort. We pick them up when they're trying to walk, or we feed them on demand when they're toddlers, not when they're babies. They should be fed on demand then, but when they're toddlers, we give them whatever they want when they want it, which sets up a whole world of problems for them. We trick or we bribe the children, toddlers, into going to sleep or playing on their own, or even putting their coats on when they don't want to. And then when they get older and they play sports and they don't like the way something is going, we say, well, the ref is blind or the other team is cheating. I saw a really interesting interview with Rich Roll, who he did with a New York Times best-selling author and educator and former dean of freshmen at Stanford University. She's actually a really good author. Her name is Julie Lythcott-Haims. And she authors, her newest book is called How to Be an Adult. And she really goes into the students at Stanford and the prevailing entitlement there and the role that their parents have in this. But here's the one thing about all of this. And I know parents are wanting the best for their kids, but here's the thing about this. None of it is true. We're not preparing our kids to be adults, to be members of society if they think that. It's not true. Things we don't want or like do happen. And resiliency is key. And when we study people that have reached certain successes, not necessarily how most people define it, but just success in general, we always see that that's a common tendency, resiliency. Very often we have to do things that we don't like. Hello, is it just me, or do you have to do things that you don't like? Hormesis, and we've talked about this word a lot, hormesis, this sort of tension, is actually healthy. It's the tension that causes us to be adaptable and to be stronger. Lisa says there are some movements like REI and gentle parenting that counteract some of that. Yes, exactly, Lisa. I've read a lot of them, of course, because I have a granddaughter, so I read a lot of that as well. So again, we can't control what happens, but we can choose the response we put our energy into. And the best thing we can do for ourselves and for our kids and for our grandkids is to teach them how to be resilient, how to have challenges and how to go through those challenges, and even how to, what we're talking about tonight, it needs to be focused, where we put our energy into needs to be focused on acceptance. Now here's where our heads are going to explode. And right away I know you're going to be saying, but wait, does acceptance mean the acceptance of the reality within and without? So we need to accept, to be resilient, we need to accept what's going on inside of you, and then the stories you're telling yourself about that, right? Because we've talked about this a lot, as Brene Brown always says, what's the story I'm telling myself about this? And the story always has to do with the future self, right? What's the story you're telling yourself, that you accept that you don't condemn yourself for thinking it, you thought it, you feel it, you accept it. And you also accept the circumstance that's going on outside of you. Theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, and by the way, I love him. I've quoted him a lot over the decades. Most people don't realize that he is actually the author of this prayer. You will recognize it. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And again, he wrote that in the 1930s. AA has made this a foundational cornerstone of the program. Now, this is a prayer that a lot of us will say, yeah, I know that. But it's really quite profound. And resilience is completely wrapped up in this prayer. I can change this, accept that it's happening, and find the courage to do something to change it. Or I cannot change this. We accept that it's happening and it's out of our control. And the wisdom to know the difference. Now, sometimes wisdom requires waiting, which we oftentimes are not comfortable with. Hey, Brittany, great to see you, honey. Good to have you with us. So sometimes, again, wisdom requires waiting, not striving, not fighting, maybe not even planning, just waiting. So there's no resistance in this prayer, none. There's no pushing a boulder up a mountain. There's also an acceptance that even the things you don't want and you can work to change are existing. So, and maybe it's about things you really cannot change as well. So here's the thing. We oftentimes think that, well, if we accept it, that we're condoning it. And that's not what this prayer is saying, and that's not what we're suggesting tonight. But we have to accept the fact that it's real before we get the wisdom to know if we can change it or if we can't change it. Maybe it's a virus that's putting tremendous pressure on just about everything. Hey, that seems to be something we cannot change, right? Maybe it's what's happening economically to us. Maybe it's what's happening in our physical bodies or in our relationships. There are things that you cannot control and things that you can. But both of them require to have resilience in the situation, acceptance that the thing has happened or is happening. I know a man once who was an athlete, really a very gifted, talented athlete, and he had an injury in his hip and he couldn't hardly walk. He was a little older at this point and he couldn't even walk. And then he gained a lot of weight, and every time he looked at himself in the mirror, he would just shake his head no. And I even saw him do this before, but he talked to me about it. He would shake his head no. He couldn't accept it, what he looked like. And we do that as well, right? When we see or we hear something we don't like, we just shake our heads like, no, I can't accept that. Acceptance is not natural, okay? Control is the operating principle in our world. And that's what our default is. What we don't want, we want to not accept. We want to control it rather than accepting that it's there. Our common understanding of acceptance suggests that we actually have a choice. When we say, but I can't accept this. But the choice is only with us and our acceptance. It's not about the circumstances, right? My refusal to accept something doesn't change the fact that it's happening, okay? We can only control our conscious thoughts and our behaviors as a response to those things. But resilience requires acceptance. And because we don't understand acceptance, it kind of reminds me of forgiveness, right? When you talk to someone about forgiveness, what's the very first thing they say? But does that mean that I forget? Does that mean that I have to trust again? Does that mean that I'm saying that this was right? No, 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 and no, right? It's the same thing with acceptance. It's not saying that you're happy about it, that you like it, that you condone it. Acceptance that supports resilience, your ability to be able to go through it, simply acknowledges the fact that it exists. Now, how many people have a hard time acknowledging the fact that what they don't like is happening? Hey, Becky, great to see you, Rebecca. Good to have you with us. So again, this is the thing. David Rico, author of The 5 Things We Cannot Change and the Things We Learn from Embracing Them, and this is a very interesting book, by the way. He puts 5 things. Everything changes and ends. And we really don't like this, right? Everything changes and ends. Okay, that's a reality that needs to be accepted so that you can be resilient in the changing or ending situation. Everything changes and ends. We need to accept that. Number 2, things do not always go as planned. Whew, boy, am I feeling that now with the newest Omicron variant where I'm at and in my travels. Things do not always go as planned. We need to accept that. All of our planning, which is fine and good and safe, and we should be planners. But as much as we plan, things do not always go as planned. To accept that is to be resilient in the ever-changing plans. Number 3, life is not always fair. We want fair, we want just. We desire that because in our hearts is a yearning for justice, of course, because Jesus is justice, okay? So we want that. But life is not always fair, David Rico says. And when we accept that, we can be resilient in the unfair situation. Number 4, pain is a part of life. How I wish it was not so for you and for me. But pain is a part of life, everyone's life. Every single person who ever lived has experienced pain. And to accept that is to be resilient in the pain. And number 5, people are not always loving and loyal. Oh, I don't think we're surprised by that, but hey, people are not always loving and loyal. And even though you wish they would be, or even though you may think you're more loyal or loving than the person you're wanting it from, when you accept this as it happens, you can be resilient in the betrayal. And that is what is required if you want resilience. Hi, Evelyn. Good to see you, honey. Great to have you with us. So it's not what happens to us that causes the suffering, although obviously painful things can happen to us, and that causes us to have pain. But what really causes the unending suffering is our reactions to the painful situation. When we don't connect to the truth that things happen to everybody, it's not that we did something wrong. It's not that we disobeyed God. It's not that this is some sort of sowing and reaping, although that is a whole other thing. But you can be perfect and still have things happen to you. It's not your fault, and yet bad things can happen to everyone. When we don't connect to that truth and we make it personal, then that's when we attach a story to it. Why did this happen? Whose fault was this that it happened? That we have to have a meaning to this painful event. And that's what causes us the most pain. The lies, the stories that get connected to the painful situation. Acceptance is saying you understand that this is real, that this is really happening. You are not happy about it, not necessarily condoning it. Even if you got the wisdom, like in the prayer, to know you need to work in changing something, there's still first an acceptance that it's real. That it's either happening or it happened. This is really key. We have to accept that it's real. We're not happy that there is systemic racism in the world, that trees are being mowed down, that pollutants are killing the seas, that children are starving. Acceptance is not giving up. It is seeing things as they really are and accepting that they're happening, and then working to change the thing. But acceptance comes before the movement, okay? And that is really important in resilience. So resilience is to be able to see the thing, work through the thing, and then work in changing things, right? But we can't get that until we first have acceptance. Acceptance is always what is needed first. If you get fired from your job and you can't seem to find another one, where do you go from there, right? It's not about detaching or just quitting and giving up on life. It's not about denial. It's about accepting, wow, I'm having a real challenge finding another job here, and I need money to pay for my rent or my mortgage or my food or my car and my kids or whatever it is. I can't seem to find a job, so what will I do? What is the path that I'm going to take? So you accept it. It's not about denial, and then you have movement. When you wrestle against the reality, your energy is in actually resisting the reality rather than changing the things that you can change. And I really want you to hear that. When we put energy in resisting, like denying the reality, rather than accepting it and then saying, but you know what? I need this, I want this, I desire it, so how can I have movement in order to go there, right? Again, the opposite of acceptance is not resistance. It is denial, okay? The opposite of acceptance is not resistance. It is denial. So if you want to do the kind of resistance work where you're working against something that's happening, like, let's say, racism or poverty or whatever it is, or ecological problems or whatever it is, we can do that resistance against those things. But first we need to accept that they exist. Do you see the difference there? There's that slight nuance. Boy, have I resisted, Diana is saying. Yes, acceptance takes very long sometimes. It does. It absolutely does, Diana. And again, it's because, first of all, when something is very painful, we don't want to accept that it's happening because it's so painful. But also, our whole culture has told us it shouldn't be happening. Which is why when we reference the verse in the beginning in 1 Peter 4:12, dear friends, don't think it's unusual when you're in the fiery trials. We need to always understand that stuff happens to everyone in the planet. This is the world that we live in. Stuff happens. And so again, when we resist that it's happening, as opposed to resisting the negativity of that thing, then we pour energy into denial. And you know what? Denial is exhausting. Okay? Avoiding pain is our primary energy drain. I'm telling you, I've been counseling for 30 years, 30 plus years. And I have seen this and seen this and seen this. Pain avoidance, people working so hard to avoid accepting that the pain is real and it's happening. That's the thing that's draining all of their energy. You know, as the saying goes, what you resist persists. We cannot live in a chronic state of denial. The thing is there, okay? Acceptance knows things happen and we will go through them. We don't invite them, we don't hope for them, we don't look for them all the time, but things happen. The prophet Isaiah shows us where the hope in our acceptance lies. Let me make sure that you don't have any more comments that I'm missing. Isaiah shows us where our hope and our acceptance lies, and it's found in chapter 43:2. When you pass through water, Isaiah says, he's saying what the word of God is, I will be with you. When you pass through rivers, they will not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you will not be scorched. The flame will not burn you. In other words, burn you up. And this is actually an assurance that we have when we go through these pressures, these crises, these uncertainties that we're all in, especially in this time that we live in now. When we walk through this, we will not be destroyed. This is what Isaiah says. And so the very first step to resilience, and I'm going to talk about what resilience looks like over the weeks. The very first step in resilience, the very first thing, the foundation that we build on is accepting that this thing is real, that it's happening, and making a sort of peace that, okay, it's here. And then asking yourself, maybe praying that prayer, God, give me the wisdom to know, can I change this? Let's just pop that up one more time, and let's pray this together. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's the prayer that we need to pray as we're walking through the process of acceptance. Shalom and ahava, peace and love.